Hey team, we're going to create a Twitch chatbot and deploy it to Heroku. I'm Colby Fayok, and if this is your first time here, make sure you hit subscribe for future updates. Twitch is a platform where really anybody around the world can stream what they're doing and start to build communities around the Twitch chat, and generally just start to build relationships with people all around the world. The cool thing about this is the more interactive that the chat is, the more likely that people are going to actually stick around and chat and really just engage and create an awesome community. This includes things like chat commands, where we can use tools like tmi.js, which is a node package where we can listen to messages inside of a Twitch chat using a node server, and we can even respond to those messages. While honestly, we really could run this bot as a local server, it's probably more helpful if we can deploy it out in the wild as a production application, where we can use languages like nodejs, which is what we'll use today, to actually run a server where we'll listen to those chat events. So we're going to build a chat bot, and we're going to base this off of Node, where we're going to use that package tmi.js to listen to messages inside of our chat, where we can listen to really any message, but particularly we're going to use the exclamation point command syntax, where if we see that command being sent, we're going to be able to use that and send any kind of response that we want. So to get started, we're going to head over to our terminal, and I'm going to create a new directory with make dir my Twitch bot. I'm going to cd into that, and I'm going to simply run npm init, which is going to create a new package for my npm project, where it's going to ask me a few questions like my package name, which I'm going to leave as default, and I'm going to leave most of these as default, except maybe my license. I'm going to change that to MIT, and the rest I'm going to leave okay. Now, if we want to change that later, it's all located inside of a package.json file now, right inside of our project directory. Next, we can open that up inside of our text editor, which I use VS Code. And while we don't have any files yet, we can go ahead and create a new file, and we're going to call that server.js. We're inside there for now. Let's just add console.log hello Twitch, where we can test that out, where we can run node server.js, and we can simply see our console log. And while running that command as node server.js is probably fine, best practice is usually to add a script to your npm packages. So inside package.json, I'm going to go to the scripts property, and I'm going to set up a new command script called start, where I'm going to set that equal to node server. That way, anytime we deploy this application or really do anything, we can always refer to npm start, even if that means that we need to change this node server.js in the future. We can even see that that works by going back to our terminal and running npm start, where we see the exact same thing. Next, the goal of our application is to actually listen to Twitch messages. So we want to install our tmi.js package, which is going to allow us to do that. So as they kind of mentioned here, we're going to run npm I for install tmi.js inside of our terminal. So I'm going to run that, which is going to go ahead and install that package. And now we're ready to go. In order to start using it, we're really going to just kind of copy and paste what we have here, but we'll go over it in a second. So I'm going to copy this anonymous connection snippet, go to my code editor, and inside of server.js, I'm going to replace it with that. So what we're doing, starting from the top, is we're importing our tmi.js library into a constant called tmi. Next, we're creating a new tmi client by using the new instance of tmi.client, where we're passing in a few properties here, where we have connection, which we're passing in a property of reconnect equals true, meaning we want it to try to reconnect each time that we actually spin up the server and it might stop. But then finally, we want to pass in a property called channels, where here we want to designate and specify any channels or Twitch username streams that we want to actually listen into. So in my instance, I'm using a username called spacejellybot, so I'm going to change this to spacejellybot. And finally, once we have our client, it's going to first connect to that client, meaning it's going to start listening to the chat, and then it's going to set up an event listener for specifically messages. So that way, anytime that the chat actually has a message, this client is going to fire this function for us, where we get a few properties here, like the channel, some tags, a message, but we can really take that and we can console log out any of that value, or we can really do whatever we want with those values. Now, in order to test this out, we need to have an actually active running Twitch where we can send messages and we can even receive messages so that we can listen to them. And really, we can do this with any Twitch channel on Twitch where I can just pass in any Twitch username here, but it's probably better just to create your own bot account, which we'll later use for actually sending messages, but it's also probably more polite to not be sending random command messages into somebody else's chat and disturbing what they're doing. So I'm going to start a stream from my Space Jelly bot account, where I'm going to then go over to Twitch and I'm going to load that up, .tv/spacejellybot. And in a second here, we'll be able to see that I'll be going live. And we can even see that we're starting to get a recursive display directly on the page. But now if we go back over to our terminal and we run node start, or npm start rather, we're going to see that we're starting to spin up our server, where it's not going to stop because we're now listening to the chat messages. But now if we send a message inside the chat, hey Twitch, and we go back over to our terminal, we can now see that Colby Fayok said hey Twitch. And if we go to our actual application code, we can see that's because when a message was sent, we're going to send that display name right along with the message. So next, the goal with this app is going to be able to respond to these messages with our bot account. So I'm going to actually use my Space Jelly bot like I mentioned before. And again, I recommend that you create a new account for this rather than using your own, just because it's probably better that people who are visiting your chat know that it's coming from a bot account rather than automated messages from you. But you can really do whatever you want at this point. But I'm going to use my Space Jelly bot, where I'm going to grab an access token where we can create an identity for this client so that we can actually interact with the chat. So to start, if we go back to the tmi.js documentation, we can scroll down and we can see the OAuth token authorization flow, where here we have an additional property that we're passing in called identity, where in particular, we're going to want to pass in our username and we're going to want to pass in a password, which will actually be our OAuth token. So we're going to copy this property, go back into our code, and as a new property in our client object, we're going to say, I'm going to use my Space Jelly bot as the username, and we're going to now go find the OAuth token that we can use for the password. So in order to get that token, the first thing we want to do is actually log into our Twitch account for our bot user, which as you can see here, I'm logged into Space Jelly bot. So we're going to want to go to the website twitchtokengenerator.com, where once we land on that page, we can see that we have an option for either a bot chat token or a custom scope token, where we want to choose bot chat token. Now, once we do, it's going to ask us to log in and authorize our account, which this is a safe application to log in to get an access token. So I'm going to authorize that. But as soon as we do, it's going to take us back. We got to first make sure that we're not actually a robot here, which because I'm in incognito, it's actually asking me to select the cars, which is absolutely brutal as usual. But once we're in here, we can see that we now have an access token, a refresh token, and the client ID is actually for the application, which is providing this helper for us. But these are values that you don't want to share anywhere. And while you see them here on my account, I'm actually going to blur them out so that you can't see what I see, but we're going to be able to use that access token so that we can actually set up our account so that it can log into tmi.js with the client and actually interact with the chat. Now back inside of our code, we're going to want to make sure that we update this value with our access token. But before we do that, we don't want to actually paste that value directly into this file. This file is going to be hosted on GitHub so that we can connect it to Heroku to deploy this application, and we don't want that access token to be publicly available inside the repository. So instead, what we want to do is we're going to use dotenv, which is another npm package, where we can create an environment variable file that will allow us to store that value safely outside of our application and pass it in as a configurable environment variable. So back inside of our terminal, I'm going to npm install dotenv. And back inside my file, I'm going to require that .env package, and I'm going to immediately fire the config function from .env, which at this point, this is going to make environment variables that I specify in the .env file available for my node process. So we can also create a new file called .env where we're going to store those variables. For our purposes, we're going to actually store two different variables where we're going to first store that username of Twitch bot username. That way it's easily configurable if we ever want to change it. But again, we're also going to store that OAuth token. That way we can save it outside of our actual project. So we want to come in here and we want to replace these values where here the username is going to be space jellybot. And while I'm not going to show you on the screen, we're going to replace this with our access key. Now back inside that file, we can actually replace our username and password values where for here, we're going to say process.env Twitch bot username, which is our variable. We're going to copy and paste that down to password, but we're going to change that to OAuth token. So now to test this out, there's one more thing we want to do before we actually try to send a response. Now, if we're sending a response with our bot user, we don't want to try to accept that message and send another response anytime that bot actually makes the message. So before we actually send anything, we're going to first test to see if that user who actually just sent a message is ourself. So the way we can do that is we're going to create a new constant called is_not_bot, where we're going to say that the tags username to lowercase, to make sure the formatting is the same, does not equal our process.env Twitch bot username. Then we can say if it is not the bot, we're going to refer back to our client and we're going to use the same method where we're going to specify the channel as the first argument so we know where we want to send it. And we're also going to send a message where let's say that the message, let's add quotation marks, was sent by tags.username. So now we can spin back up our application with npm start. And if we head on over to Twitch, we can see that we again get that recursive look at ourselves as I'm recording this. But now if we say, hey, Twitch, inside of our chat log, we can see that Space Jellybot just responded with message, hey Twitch, which was sent by me, Colby Fayok. Now, as we're listening to these messages, we want to be able to accept the syntax of the exclamation point command so that we can take that, we can take any arguments, and we can actually use it in our application. So back inside of our code, at the top of the file, I'm going to create a new constant called regexp command, which I'm going to paste in here because it's a little complicated, just like any other regular expression. But using JavaScript, we're going to create a new regexp, which here we're going to first say we want the exclamation point. So starting this out, the caret means that it's the start of the string. So we have the start of our string with our exclamation point. We next are going to create a capturing group where inside of that capturing group, we're going to say that that can be any alphanumeric value, and it could be one or more of those, so such as command, where next we optionally have an optional capturing group or a non-captioning group with the question mark colon, where we're going to say that this can be any white space, or if we push a space here, that can be that value. And then finally, optionally, we want to be able to accept any value at the end, where that can be anything such as an argument, such as my argument, which is then what we can use to provide dynamic commands. So now if we go back down to our message handler, we want to change how we're actually using client say here. So the first thing I'm going to do is if it is our bot, we're going to just return out of here. But if it is not a bot, what we want to do is we want to try to check if it's an actual command. So I'm going to paste the snippet in where we're going to take that message value, which is a string that contains that message that we saw earlier, and we're going to run the match method on that string, which is going to pass in our regular expression, which we can use to detect whether or not that string actually includes the command and capture those values. So because we are actually capturing values, if we scroll back up, we can see these parentheses, which we noted were actually capturing values. We can see that it is destructured from an array where we have the raw value as the 0 index of that array. For the first index, we have our command, which is going to be that first capturing group. And we're going to also have the argument, which is the second index, which is going to be that last capturing group. So we can then split up those values, we can understand what the command is, and we can also understand what the argument is. So finally, we can create a new expression where we say if that command actually exists, we're going to use client.say again and pass it into that channel, where we're going to say command found with argument. That way we can debug and see exactly what we're going to be passing back right inside of Twitch. So now that we have our updated code, we actually need to restart our server anytime we make a change. So I'm going to run npm start again. And if we actually go to Twitch, we can see that if we run a command such as Colby Fayok, we can see that command Colby was found with argument of Fayok. Now that doesn't actually make sense, so we probably want to actually set up some real commands that people can send and get a valid response. So at the top of my file, I'm going to create a new constant and I'm going to call that commands, where I'm going to set up a few mappings for what I want to actually send, where maybe one of them can be website, where I'm going to create a new object there with response, and I'm going to say https://spacejelly.dev. But I also want to try another one, and maybe let's call that upvote, where I'm going to again specify the response, but instead I'm going to set that as a function where I'm going to return that as a message that says user was just upvoted. And what we'll do is we'll dynamically pass in that user value from our actual execution of it inside of the message block. So we'll update that in a second. So down in the code where we're actually firing that command, we want to first try to see if we can find that command. So I'm going to specify a new constant called command to execute. We're going to specify that equal to commands command, where if you remember that command is going to actually be that value, we can say or that's equal to an empty object. That way we're going to destructure this command to execute to make it a little bit easier to run. So we can destructure that response, where the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say if type of response equals function, we're going to try to run that function as part of our client say. So I'm going to copy and paste that back up there, where for the message, I'm going to say response as a function. And remember, we want that username, so let's pass it as the first argument, where you can really pass anything in as this response. You probably want it to be pretty flexible, so that way we can grab anything from that context. But for now, for demonstration purposes, let's say tags.username, where if we go back up, I can now set that argument so that user gets passed in as user. But we also want to handle this case where we're actually only passing in a string. So we can also say else if type of response equals string. If I can actually type response right, we can say that we want client.say in our channel, and we're just going to simply pass in response because at that point it's simply a string. And I'm going to get rid of the command at that point since we don't need it anymore. So again, what this is going to do is it's going to try to find that command in our object mapping of commands. It's going to grab that response if it works. It's then going to check if it's either a function or a string and execute that command differently depending on what it is. And we can see here we have two commands available. One is website, where we're going to simply get our website back here. We're also going to have upvote, where it's not dynamic, but it's going to say that user we pass in was just upvoted, exclamation point. So let's give that a try. So again, let's restart our npm server. And if we head back over to Twitch, we're live again, and let's try website, where now we can see that it returned spacejelly.dev. But also, if we want to try that upvote, where I'm going to say upvote Colby Fayok, because of course I want to upvote myself, we can see that our spacejelly bot says user Colby Fayok was just upvoted. Now, in order to get our Twitch bot actually deployed, we need to do two things. First of all, we need to create a GitHub repository, which you can see that I did here, which includes all of our code, including our server, our package.json, and anything else, where I recommend putting that .env in the node modules inside of a gitignore file. That way you're not exposing that .env inside of GitHub along with any other secret information. But once we have that, we also want to go over to Heroku, where it's a free account to get started, but we're going to use this to create our account where we're going to deploy our actual node application. So before we dive in, I do want to note that Heroku does have billing associated with it. Now, if you want to try to run your Twitch bot 24/7 every single day of the year, you're going to run over that free tier if you're just creating an account without setting up any billing information. Now, the great thing is if you do set up your credit card with your account, you're going to get enough of a free tier. As long as you're not using any other application on Heroku, you're going to have enough of a free tier to cover that Twitch bot for the entire year. So make sure that you're keeping an eye on billing just in case so that you don't get charged inadvertently without actually realizing it. But now we're going to actually create our new app where I'm going to specify my app name as my Twitch bot Colby, and we can choose whatever region we want. I'm going to stick with United States instead of Europe. I'm going to go ahead and create my application. But as soon as we're dropped into the Heroku dashboard, where now we want to select our deployment method, which in our case is going to be GitHub, where you can alternatively use the Heroku the CLI. I would like to use GitHub, so I'm going to select that. Where now we're going to actually connect our GitHub account, which I already did here. If you didn't, all you'll have to do is authorize your GitHub account so that you can find that repository for Heroku. But once you do, I'm going to search for that Twitch bot. And then once it comes up, you can see that I have my demo from before, but the one that we're working with is my Twitch bot Colby. I'm going to hit connect. And we can see that that's instantly connected and it's going to be available for deploy. Now, another thing I like to do is I like to set up automatic deployments for that repository. That way, anytime I push new changes to main, it's automatically going to send those changes out into our new server. Now, before we actually have this deployed and ready to use, we need to do a couple more things. First of all, let's head over to the settings tab. And if we scroll down, we need to set up our config vars, which is going to be our environment variables. Now here we can specify those such as Twitch bot username, which in my instance was space jelly bot. And we can also specify our OAuth token with Twitch OAuth token, which is going to be our key that we used earlier inside of our .env file. Once you have those saved and set though, we can scroll down to build packs. We're going to want to click add build pack, and specifically we're going to select the officially supported one of nodejs, which means it's going to recognize that it's a nodejs application for our project. Now, as one last step, we need to specify a new file inside of our project called Procfile, which this is where we're going to actually configure Heroku to know what kind of resource we're going to use for our dyno and how to start up our project. Now, there's two types of dynos with Heroku. There's one that's for web and there's one called workers, where web is probably more helpful to use if you're trying to receive requests. But since what we're doing is really a background process that we're listening into the Twitch chat, we want it to be a worker, which is going to just run in the background. So back inside of our project, we're going to create that new file called Procfile. Where inside we're going to say worker, and we want to specify that to be npm start. And at this point, we can go back to our terminal. We can add that file, adding our proc file, where when that goes up to GitHub, like we mentioned before, we set it up so that this is automatically going to deploy anytime that change hits our GitHub account. So if we go over to overview, we can actually see that we have our build in progress immediately as soon as we push that out. Once that's done, we can head back over to our resources tab and refresh the page, where we can now see that we have two types of dynos defined here, where like I said, we have our web and our worker. Now we don't want to run the web one, so we're going to head over to the edit, we're going to turn that one off, but we're going to head over to the worker and we're going to turn that one on. And at this point, because it's automatically deployed, we should be ready to go to actually test our application. We can see this real time if we go over to view logs, where we can see that our node.js server was actually started up as a worker dyno. So now let's go over to Twitch to test this out. So back on Twitch, we can see that we're now live again, and let's try running those commands. So I'm going to specify website, where now we can still see that we have space jelly bot specifying our space jelly.dev website, and upvote, where this time I'm going to upvote space jelly bot because he's being a good bot. And we can see that it still says user Colby Fayoc was just upvoted. But now if we go back over to Heroku, we can look inside of our logs, and that console log statement that we had from earlier in this tutorial is still present there, where it's going to send the username, the display name, and that message. So we can see exactly that it's working on our worker dyno, and we're processing those commands just as we expected. Chatbots, whether for Twitch or anything else like Discord, is a great way to provide more interaction and just general resources for people to engage with the community. While providing static values like we did here is a great way to provide some of those resources, being able to do so dynamically with requests right inside of that response really takes it up another level, where you can do a lot more fun things to personalize that experience for the people who are visiting your stream. Who's your favorite Twitch streamer, and what do they do to make things more interactive? If you didn't know, I have mine called Kobayashi Maru that I typically do on Wednesdays, so keep an eye out for that. If you like this video, make sure you hit thumbs up and subscribe for future updates. Thanks for watching.